Okay, let's see if we're live. Okay, and we have sound. For those of you who aren't aware, this is a t-shirt of the apostate prophet, another wrong thinker who was banned by Twitter, like me, although he still has one account on Twitter, I believe. That's not his personal account. He was also banned multiple times from Instagram, and I think suspended from Facebook. I could be wrong, but he's been in all sorts of trouble on social media for critiquing the false prophet who will not be named. So I would just recommend checking out his channel. You can also buy. I think he still has merch for sale, but that's not a plug of anything other than his videos. He's very well informed about Islam growing up, or as they say overseas, Islam. He grew up in a Sufi Turkish family in Germany and is living in the United States now and making great YouTube videos. If I would have to recommend him, Political Islam, i.e. Bill Warner, Act 17 Apologetics, i.e. David Wood, and Robert Spencer and Jihad Watch, of course, in terms of videos. Pamela Geller, I don't think has an active YouTube channel, but she has a great website as a good friend of mine. I would also check out her work. Okay, now that that's out of the way, I think I'll talk a little bit about what's been in the news recently. As you can tell by the title, I'm going to be discussing abortion and the new abortion law in Alabama, which has attracted a lot of controversy, even from such great minds as Samantha from Who's the Boss, and there's so many ridiculous aspects of this. Now, within the community of those opposed to abortion, there's particularly the Christian community, there's a dispute between abolitionists and the pro-life movement. Now, when I say the pro-life movement, I mean mainstream groups like Focus on the Family and the Susan B. Anthony list, which supports pro-life political candidates, the National Right to Life, the Coalition for Life, groups like that, basically mainstream groups that are working on an incrementalist approach to doing away with abortion. And opposed to that strategy is the abolitionist movement. And those would be people like, if you're familiar with it, Apologia Church. There are a lot of politically active Calvinists, but it's not just Calvinists, it's also other Christians who think that abortion should be abolished. And there's an analogy, an analog to this in the 19th century during these debates over slavery. You had the 18th and 19th century in Great Britain and the U.S. Of course, you had people like William Wilberforce who were abolitionists, and they were a very tiny, small minority, even though there were a lot of people that had qualms about slavery. Obviously, the abolitionists, the people who just wanted to eradicate it completely, immediately, were a very, very tiny percentage of the population. And they were represented eloquently by people like William Wilberforce. And they also had people in the U.S. Congress, radical Republicans and philosophers and activists in the anti-slavery movement who were abolitionists. And they were at loggerheads over how to approach it. The abolitionists were always pushing for the complete abolition of slavery immediately, and there was a anti-slavery movement represented by people like Abraham Lincoln and I guess what you would call moderates, who also abhorred slavery, but they didn't feel that you could just abolish it immediately. And there's an analog to this in the modern abortion, modern movement against abortion, where you have abolitionists who think that that bills that focus on heartbeat bills, primarily these are the ones that are being enacted, are immoral because they say that there are some that you can abort, and they basically imply that you can abort children before you can detect a heartbeat. And they also have practical reasons for opposing these laws. And I'm not going to get into the technicalities or try to advocate for one side or the other. I mean, there are definitely legitimate points to be made in favor of both approaches, just like during the campaign to abolish chattel slavery in the international slave trade. There were good arguments on both sides. But basically, I just told you about this book to kind of set the stage. And I don't think that aspect of this debate is discussed that much, especially not by the media, which kind of assumes that the default position is either you're in favor of women's quote unquote reproductive rights, i.e. their ability to kill the baby in utero, or you're opposed to that. And there isn't much discussion of some of the very contentious debates within the movement to oppose abortion. But I wanted to primarily look at the pro-abortion reaction to these laws, like the one in Alabama and the one in Georgia. And I think you have, excuse me, you have an example of how detached the left is from reality. Now, I have a Facebook friend, Stephen Herod, who runs, I think it's called CatholicVoter.com. He's a very astute guy, and he, I think it was him on Facebook the other day. He made a lot of good points about this demented opposition to abortion and how it wasn't even pragmatically, it's not advantageous from the Democratic point of view. You have these Democratic candidates who've been pushed further and further to the left and to the extreme. And even in a place like New York, these people are forced, or maybe they probably do it willingly, but there's the momentum is to enact laws that essentially legalize infanticide across the board with no checks on the ability of an abortionist to kill. And even in a state like New York, which is overwhelmingly liberal and elected these people, they think that it's basically insane. 70% or 3/4 of the people think it's legitimately insane. The number of people that adhere to the Planned Parenthood type dogmatic position, when you really get down to it, is very, very small. There's a very small minority that thinks women should be able to kill their babies from the time of conception all the way to dilation. It's a minority viewpoint, but because the media is so overwhelmingly steeped in this toxic political philosophy, they don't give you that impression. They think that they want to give you the impression that laws like Alabama's and Georgia's are extreme, when the truth is they're very measured. I mean, Ali Stuckey did a brief analysis of this, and I think she even came to the conclusion that, if anything, the Georgia law is too lenient on abortionists. I mean, essentially, you have people who are murdering. Even for those of you who've never watched the Gosnell, the movie, or read the book, I would recommend that you do that sometime in but before the end of the year. And it is on DVD. You can buy the book at Barnes and Noble, I believe, or order it. And it's an illustration. This guy was basically a sociopath and a serial killer. He was the biggest serial killer in the country's history, and he got virtually no news coverage beyond some local papers. And the media ignored it because they didn't consider it serial killing. They just assumed this guy murdered babies who were, out of the womb for a couple of minutes. It's no different than murdering babies who are inside the womb. And there is a twisted logic to that, which I agree with. That there's nothing. There's a video making fun of this idea called the magical birth canal, which is that something more magical happens when a baby is popped out of the womb, and that it suddenly becomes a person. And even now, that's being limited. I mean, I would be surprised if you have Democratic candidates the next election cycle advocating for, murdering babies, within a month of birth. Excuse me. My voice is really ragged, so I'm just going to try to sum up this already overlong video by saying the reaction to this law is just an illustration of the intellectual depravity of the people running the Democratic Party and running the media, and standing at the helm of groups like Planned Parenthood. And I'm glad that at least the lines are being drawn more clearly. There's no Clinton-esque evasion of what this is, and what this is murder. It's as simple as that.